In online learning, it's very important that we set appropriate expectations for faculty and students. In this video, we're going to discuss the 3 buckets that we can frame these expectations in and how to go about starting to set those expectations. So here are those buckets. We can have course level expectations, which are usually centered around policies and procedures for your course. These are most commonly seen in the syllabus, but they can be in other places in your course spaces. We have faculty level expectations. So these are the behaviors and processes that you are promising to use in this class. And then there's student expectations, which sometimes seem obvious to faculty. You know, I'm teaching a class and I expect you to turn in work and whatnot. But in an online class especially, there's a lot of value in going ahead and calling out student expectations. So, course level expectations. I have a list here of the most common, and I want to talk with you mostly about my second and third bullets. So first is predictability of online design. By this I mean there should be a predictability to how your course content will unfold. That means a module should appear on a predictable cycle. So if you don't have your modules available to students all at once, those modules should always appear roughly around the same day and same time each week so that students know when content's being released to them. For example, in our online EDD classes, the content for a week opens on a Friday and the week concludes on the following Sunday. So not that first Sunday, but the following Sunday. So a module in that class actually runs for 10 days. And that means module A is open and still technically running, even though module B will actually open in that Friday of that original module. And the purpose of that overlap is by design, and it's a very predictable schedule for students so that students who are working full-time and also taking classes have the option, if they'd like, to start working on the next module in that weekend. Around that same level of predictability, I mentioned due dates here. In a face-to-face class, let's say that meets on Monday and Wednesdays, work was probably due around class time on Monday and Wednesdays. In an online class, you now have 7 days a week and 24 hours a day in which you can play with due dates for your assignments and activities. However, for an online student, it is a little unbearable to manage a class, an online class, that has due dates all over the week at all different times of day. So the first thing to think about is, what time of day do you want work to be due? Historically, online classes have used the time of 11:59 p.m. And the reason for that is to say, I just want to do, let's say, on Saturday. So at any point on Saturday before 11:59 p.m., that very last minute of that day, you can turn in your work. There is a new movement, however, to say, hey, do we really want to be giving students until 11:59 p.m.? Are we communicating to them that we want them working late into the night on their assignments, and are we getting the best of our students if we allow them to do this? Because of that, there's been a movement to have assignments due at 5 p.m. or 8 p.m. or 12 p.m. on the given assignment day. And the student response has been positive in that it sets, again, an expectation that work is done at a reasonable time, and actually in some ways encourages students to plan ahead because they know they only actually have until 8 p.m. of that evening or 5 p.m., etc., to get that assignment done. Similarly, it's important to have predictable days of the week where assignments are due. Personally, in my online courses, when they run over a 16-week period, I normally would have work due on Wednesdays and Sundays. I typically open my week for my students on Mondays, so they have a few days before maybe some initial posting or acknowledgement is due on Wednesday. And then larger assignments are typically due on Sundays. This is so that students, again, have a predictable cycle of when and what they have to do. So the next bucket to talk about are faculty expectations. So these are behaviors that you are promising your students that you're going to exhibit. So they include how you're going to participate in the class. Are you going to be active in discussion boards, responding to all students and engaging in discussions, or are you going to hang back and simply provide points of clarification or redirection when necessary? It doesn't matter which you pick. It's just very important that you communicate that with students and then you follow that policy or expectation that you have set up. Similarly, to avoid a sense of isolation in online learning, students need to know when they can communicate with you. So how can they communicate? Email, phone, text, what's appropriate? When? When are you available? Are there hours of the day that you prefer not to be called or texted or emailed? Let the students know and let them know how long it's going to take you to respond to any messages that you might receive. You're encouraged as an online faculty to have regular and recurring office hours, even just 1 hour a week where a student can meet with you via Zoom or perhaps via phone. It's perfectly acceptable to have students email you so that you don't log into somewhere for an hour when no students are planning on joining you, but it should again be this recurring and predictable set of time where you can interact with them, either one-on-one or in small groups. And then lastly, feedback and the turnaround of work. Students want to know what kind of feedback you're going to be providing them and roughly when after they've submitted an assignment to you. I find it's very helpful to ground that when of the feedback and turnaround cycle in terms of the deadline and not their submission date. So for example, I tell my students in a kind of large, writing intensive section for a rhetoric and communication class that I will turn around feedback to them within 10 days of the due date. This buys me a little bit of time. I like to not start grading until all of the work is turned in. But the students who turn it in early, for them, they might be waiting 2 or 3 weeks before they're going to get their feedback. So I like to be clear that I am balancing my schedule around the due date of that assignment, not their submission date. And lastly, I want you thinking about student expectations. So how should students be acting in this online class? How should they interact with one another? So what is their etiquette, or in this case, netiquette? How frequently do you expect them to be logging into the learning management system or into their email? So you're telling them how quickly you'll respond to their messages. You should set an expectation that if you respond to them or if you send an email question to them, that they are going to respond to you also in a timely fashion. It's important. Online learning comes with a sense of kind of self-management, or that you have to be monitoring your own deadlines and due dates because you're not seeing people in person. But it's important to kind of define what self-management might mean for you in your particular online class. What should students be paying attention to and how can they best manage themselves? And lastly, you might want to set some expectations around participation. This is commonly seen in discussion boards where a faculty member might explicitly type out what they're expecting to see in both an initial post and a discussion board versus responses to classmates. But certainly you could take participation out much more than that and truly either define how they'll be graded on participation or what the expectations will be. The important thing is to not forget to place these expectations in your course and to also make sure that you're reviewing them regularly with your students. If you have assignments or activities in your class, point the students back to where these expectations rest. And if you get any questions from students about your behavior, you can also point them back to these expectations. But this comes with a caveat that, of course, you must be meeting the expectations, especially those faculty behaviors that you have set for them. Everybody honoring and accepting those expectations is what will make an online class work effectively.